The text for the sermon this morning is found in the song sheets. It's from Matthew's Gospel, the 3rd chapter. I'm laughing because I have this cute little boy looking at me like I've got a bag of presents I'm going to hand him at any minute or something. What is his name? Damien. Hi, Damien. This translation of the gospel lesson is from the Message translation, and I love the way Reverend Peterson, who is the translator of this, puts some of these phrases. There's no mistaking the meaning when you read it in very modern language. He calls this section "Thunder in the Desert." While Jesus was living in the Galilean hills, John, called the Baptizer, was preaching in the desert country of Judea. His message was simple and austere, like his desert surroundings. Change your life. God's kingdom is here. John and his message were authorized by Isaiah's prophecy. Thunder in the desert. Prepare for God's arrival. Make the road smooth and straight. John dressed in a camel hair habit tied at the waist by a leather strap. He lived on a diet of locusts and wild field honey. People poured out of Jerusalem, Judea, and the Jordanian countryside to hear him and see him in action. There at the Jordan River, those who came to confess their sins were baptized into a changed life. When John realized that a lot of Pharisees and Sadducees were showing up for a baptismal experience because it was becoming the popular thing to do, he exploded. "Brood of snakes! What do you think you're doing slithering down here to the river? Do you think a little water on your snake skins is going to make any difference? It's your life that must change, not your skin. And don't think you can pull rank by claiming Abraham as a father. Being a descendant of Abraham is neither here nor there. Descendants of Abraham are a dime a dozen. What counts is your life. Is it green and blossoming? Because if it's dead wood, it goes in the fire. I'm baptizing you here in the river, turning your old life in for a kingdom life. The real action comes next. The main character in this drama, compared to him, I am a mere stagehand. This character will ignite the kingdom life within you, a fire within you, the Holy Spirit within you, changing you from the inside out. He's going to clean house, make a clean sweep of your lives. He'll place everything true in its proper place before God. Everything false he'll put out with the trash to be burned. Here ends the lesson. I want to share with you a poem this morning from T.E. Lawrence. Because in some ways this poem is about you. All people dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous people, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. It's always a memorable experience when you run into people who are dreamers of the day. Lawrence calls them dangerous people. They are people who seem to have a power about them or a vision about them that's important to us. And they happen in all walks of life. Sometimes you end up working in a company that has a visionary person at the head of the company. Sometimes it's a particular teacher that's that way. And a person in any walk of life that has a particular ability to see things that the rest of us just don't notice. They have a greater awareness, and therefore the possibilities in their lives are greater. They are true prophets because sometimes they can see things in the future that they would like to work for, that they would like to see come true, and they can already see them when we cannot. And they are able to muster courage and hope to keep going even against terrible odds. They have a persistence about them that is inspiring. And their dream is good enough to carry others along with them. It's a dream which can be caught by others, like a cold. Now, Jesus, of course, is the #1 example of these dreamers of the day. And I wonder if I talked to you long enough and you thought long enough, could you think of others? Other people who are these dreamers of the day, who encourage hope and bring so much into life that we never saw before. I want to tell you about one experience of my own. I met one of these dreamers of the day about 42 years ago. His name was William Holmes Borders, and he was pastor of Wheat Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. It was a beautiful Chicago summer evening, and on the Sunday evenings they had special worship services at the college I attended, North Park College. And so I went there with a huge crowd of people. People came from many other churches because the preachers that they had invited were supposed to be tremendous preachers, not the ordinary pulpit variety like we see in churches like Chaffin. But these were supposed to be really terrific preachers, and for most instances, they certainly were. Now, at the time, I was beginning to have a dream about going into the ministry. I thought about it a lot, but I kept putting it off, and as a matter of fact, I wouldn't make a decision about it for 10 more years. Wouldn't make a commitment to it. But I had a lot of enthusiasm, and I really loved the church, and I loved working in the church, and I loved church people, and I loved church suppers, and I loved the apricot pies that were made by some church members. Not mentioning any of those here that make them, but at any rate, that's an inside joke for those of you who are visitors. I thought, being a minister, being in a church that's a beautiful church, all decorated and nice music and all the other things, seeing the kids running around, what a sweet and enjoyable work that would be. And then on this warm summer evening, that all changed for me. Very abruptly, by the way. Borders was preaching. He was a tall, distinguished black man, about 70 years old, had beautiful white hair. He looked like probably the most competent human being you could ever see. He had a presence about him even before he started to speak. He'd been a pastor for over 50 years, starting just at the end of his teenage life. And he ministered through some of America's toughest times, and he ministered to a very, very large church in Atlanta, almost in the same neighborhood as Martin Luther King Jr.'s father's church. The only thing I can tell you, and if you've never heard it, I hope someday you will, the man's preaching was spellbinding. He preached for 45 minutes, and I thought it was maybe 15 when he finished. He had that soft southern drawl, which is pleasant, I think, to listen to. He had the wisdom from his experience and his many years of study, and his deep intelligence and his awareness of what was going on in society. And you could hear in his voice his deep commitment of faith. The reality of his dreams were powerful. The dream that he had about doing Christ's work in the world and making a difference. You could see it in him, you could feel it around him, and everybody in the audience that night was really just entranced by this man's preaching. One of the stories he told, the story that changed my life about and my thinking about the ministry, was that he would go to conferences around the state, and the ministers would get together and they'd try to help the churches that were struggling, and they would talk about things that they could do about some of the social issues in their communities, because most of them were ministering to very poor people. People not getting the right education, people being cheated mostly by the government that was supposed to protect their rights. You remember what that was like from your history lessons, if not from your own experience in the 30s and 40s and 50s. He told about how often while they were driving through a town going to a meeting, they would see a black person being lynched. And they would hear the story of a person. He told particularly about one young boy who was about 16 years old, who had dared challenge the shopkeeper in the town on some issue of fairness, I guess. And the shopkeeper was a man of some power in the town, and he turned on this boy, and the boy tried to fight back.